They claimed I turned my own sister's wedding into a battlefield. They whispered that I was jealous, a petty ghost of a woman desperate for attention, and that I'd handpicked her big day to finally stage my revenge. But there's a detail they conveniently leave out. I wasn't even not invited to that wedding. The ugly reality? While my parents spread lies about my character to anyone who'd listen, my sister was walking down the aisle wearing my grandmother's necklace, the exact one promised in will specifically to me. They ignored my calls for months, only to blow up my phone on the night of my own ceremony, begging me to save her failing reception. If you believe in family loyalty, stay tuned. If you believe in justice, you'll want to hear how I got mine. Make sure to like and subscribe for more stories where the truth finally bites back. Let's go back to where the silence first started. My wedding didn't just happen, it echoed. It sounded like a sudden summer thunderclap and felt like the first unfiltered hit of sunlight after a long, dark winter. We stood in an old-growth botanical garden, the glass dome overhead shattering the afternoon light into 1,000 jagged diamonds that danced across the aisle. My lace veil didn't just move. It whispered against the stone floor with every shallow breath I took. I tried to anchor myself in the sensory details to keep from floating away, the sharp, tart tang of the lemon zest in my water, the slight, persistent ache in my cheeks from a day of performing joy, and the way Daniel looked at me like I was a miracle he hadn't quite earned yet. But on the left side of that aisle, the reality was stark and cold. 5 rows of mahogany chairs sat perfectly aligned and perfectly, hauntingly empty. White programs, tied with rough-hewn twine, sat untouched. Reserved placards stood like small, wooden tombstones for people who were still very much alive. Napkins were folded into crisp, unopened envelopes, containing secrets that would never be shared. Those seats were meant to hold the weight of my entire history. The heavy scent of my mother's expensive lily perfume, my father's dry, raspy cough laugh, Megan's inevitable and theatrical eye roll, and the playful shoulder nudge from Chloe, the girl I'd called my sister since we were in pigtails. Instead, only a thin layer of spring dust and a few stray pollen grains settled where their winter coats should have been. Every time my gaze drifted left, the emptiness felt like a quiet surgical blade pressing between my ribs. When the double doors finally swung open and I took that first trembling step, the rest of the room stood in a wave of genuine warmth. I saw colleagues, neighbors, and the women from my Saturday morning running group all smiling back with watery eyes. Daniel waited at the end of that long walk, his cheeks damp. Their presence should have been enough to drown out the silence of the empty rows, but those chairs spoke a language of betrayal, and unfortunately, I have been fluent in that dialect since I was a child. This slow-burn betrayal didn't happen overnight. It was engineered over 9 months. It started the day I sent a group text with our save the date and a vibrant photo of the sun-drenched garden. Less than 10 days later, Megan effectively declared war by announcing her own engagement. 2 weeks after that, heavy, cream-colored invitations began landing in mailboxes all over town. She'd scheduled her lavish engagement gala on the exact same Saturday as my wedding. The invites featured gold-embossed photos of her and her fiancé on a penthouse terrace, looking down at the world. When I confronted my mother, she gave me a thin, tight smile and said, "We'll find a way to be there for both, honey," which in our part of the country is just code for "we've already chosen her." My father's only contribution was a single thumbs-up emoji sent nearly 48 hours late. Chloe, who had promised to help me with my veil, simply stopped answering my calls. During the ceremony, the officiant's voice was steady and kind, a sharp contrast to the storm in my head. Daniel squeezed my hand, his eyes never leaving mine. "Just breathe with me," he mouthed. I did. I whispered my vows with a voice that only faltered once, not because I had any doubts about the man standing in front of me, but because every word of forever felt like it was being tugged toward a different, louder celebration happening 10 miles away. While I was promising my life to Daniel, the people who had raised me were likely raising a glass to a woman who had spent her life trying to erase me. When we finally kissed, the room transformed. Rose petals caught the draft from the open windows, and the cocktail hour spilled out onto the terrace like wine from a bottle. My old college roommate, Sarah, hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. I forced myself to laugh at the right moments, hitching up the heavy satin of my skirt as our friends' kids played tag around my heels. My phone remained face down in my small beaded clutch. Daniel and I had made a pact that today was our sanctuary. Yet, the questions still managed to seep through the cracks. "Is your mom coming later?" asked Mrs. Higgins. A woman who wasn't related to me but had brought me homemade lasagna every time I was sick in high school. I lied with a practice smile that felt as stiff as a bruise. Travel issues, I said, my voice as thin as paper. Mrs. Higgins saw right through it, her eyes flashing with a protective heat before she squeezed my forearm and walked away to the buffet. By the time dinner service began, the long tables had stitched the room into a vibrant quilt of people who had truly chosen us. The scent of rosemary roasted chicken and garlic-infused risotto perfumed the air, heavy and rich. Daniel's best man stood up to tell a story about the time Daniel tried to fix a broken blender with nothing but a spatula and a silent prayer, and the room erupted in a roar of laughter so genuine we had to pause the toasts just to catch our breath. I tried with everything I had to pour that warmth into the icy, cavernous void beside me, but it remained a hollow silence. My mind drifted back to 2 weeks prior, the last time I'd begged my mother to reconsider. It's just delicate, she'd said, her voice sounding like dry parchment. Megan's new in-laws are flying in from London on private jets. We simply cannot be in 2 places at once, Sarah. My wedding is not a place, mother, I had replied, my voice dangerously calm because any hint of rage would have seen me labeled as the family's resident drama queen. It's my life. She just sighed, that weary, practiced sigh she used when a waiter brought her the wrong vintage of wine. You'll understand when you have children of your own. That was the moment the final hinge swung shut in my heart. During the speeches, the sun dipped below the horizon, and the botanical garden turned honey-soft under 1,000 glowing bulbs. I caught my reflection in the greenhouse glass, a woman in white who looked like me, but stood steadier, her spine forged from something harder than hope. Behind me, those empty rows still sat like missing teeth in a smile. I lifted my glass regardless. To the ones who showed up, I said. If my voice cracked, only Daniel was close enough to hear it. He kissed my knuckles, and the room cheered as the DJ called us to the floor. We moved to the music like we'd practiced 100 times in our cramped apartment kitchen. Still with me? He whispered. Always, I replied, and for the first time that day, I meant it without reservation. We cut the cake beneath a canopy of swaying string lights, lemon sponge with a raspberry buttercream that looked like freshly fallen snow. The silver knife felt cold and heavy in our hands, the handle hand engraved with our initials by a woman at the farmer's market who told us that love isn't a feeling, it's a verb. Everyone crowded in close, their phones held high, their faces open and bright with borrowed joy. I was laughing for real when my phone, which I'd abandoned all day, began to vibrate against the fine white linen of the table like a trapped, angry hornet. One buzz, then another, a steady, frantic crawl across the cloth until it tapped against my champagne flute. I reached for it, my thumb still sticky with frosting, my other hand still linked with Daniel's. The screen lit my face in a ghoulish blue. At the top was a red notification bubble that stopped the blood in my veins. 74 missed calls. All from my mother. The edges of the room went watery and thin, the sound of the party fading as if someone had turned the world's volume down to a whisper. People were still clapping, still calling for a second slice of cake, but I was staring at that number. In any language, 74 means a catastrophe. It means sirens, hospitals, or an apology that has arrived far too late to matter. The sugar on my tongue turned to dry chalk. Daniel leaned in, his eyes darting from my pale face to the glowing screen. What is it? He murmured. Nothing, I told the room, but to him, I whispered, it's my mom. I set the phone face down, my hand steady only because it had to be, but I felt it a wire tightening between this room of light and a distant ballroom where my name was being dragged through the dirt. Whatever waited on the other end of those 74 calls had teeth, and it was coming for my peace. By the time I finally slipped my phone open again, the glowing red alert had climbed to 79 missed calls. My throat felt like it was being constricted by an invisible wire. Inside, Daniel was in the middle of a boisterous toast with his old college crew, the room vibrating with a warmth that I suddenly felt too tainted to touch. I plastered on a fragile, hollow smile, murmured an excuse about needing air, and slipped through the heavy side doors into the biting night air. The botanical garden was a sanctuary of chilling silence compared to the roar of the reception. Paper lanterns swayed in the midnight breeze, glowing like soft, captured embers against the dark foliage. My heels crunched on the wet gravel as I distanced myself from the music, seeking a shadow where no one could see my composure dissolve. My phone screamed in my palm again, vibrating with an almost sentient desperation. I answered without thinking. Sarah? The voice on the other end was Jenna's, sharp, breathless, and barely above a whisper. Jenna? What's going on? Why has my mother been? You won't believe the poison they're spitting, Jenna interrupted, her words tumbling out in a frantic, jagged rush. They're telling the entire gala that you orchestrated your wedding date specifically to sabotage Megan's big night. They're telling everyone who will listen that you've always been jealous and petty, and that you timed your I-dos just to snatch the spotlight from her engagement party. I stood frozen under a flickering lantern, the word sabotage cutting through the night like a shard of ice. That's insane. I booked this venue 6 months before Megan even met her fiancé. I know that, Sarah, Jenna said, her voice dripping with a mix of pity and urgency. But your mother is selling it as gospel truth, and people are nodding along like it's a script. They're telling guests that you're difficult and unstable, and that's why the family sadly had to boycott your wedding to support the loyal daughter. Even your father, Sarah, he's over there, glass in hand, laughing with his business associates about how you've always been the black sheep. So it only makes sense no one showed up for you. The gravel beneath my feet seemed to tilt. My own father. He really said that. To those people. I'm so sorry, Sarah. I wish I was making this up. Jenna paused, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial low. And Chloe? She's right there in the middle of it. She's telling people she graciously turned down being your maid of honor because your guest list demands were manic. They're rewriting the story of your life, Sarah. Right now, while you're supposed to be cutting your cake, they are turning you into a villain in a ballroom 10 miles away. The distant laughter from the conservatory felt like a mockery. My hands were shaking so violently I had to grip the phone with both palms. Why? Why do this to me on my wedding day? Jenna let out a sharp, broken breath. Because they still expect you to be their fixer. That's the truly sick part. Your mother has been complaining all night that she can't get a hold of you because there's a crisis with Megan's gala. The florist messed up the centerpieces and the lead caterer is having a meltdown. She keeps telling everyone, Sarah will fix it, she always handles these things. She's acting like you're an on-call servant for your sister while she publicly trashes your character. A cold, jagged laugh escaped my throat. She skipped my wedding, slandered me to every socialite in the city. And now she's blowing up my phone because she wants me to act as her unpaid crisis manager? I wanted you to hear it from me before she tried to rope you into her mess, Jenna whispered. But there's one more thing. I'm texting you a photo. Don't tell anyone I sent it, but you need to see what's really happening. My phone buzzed a digital sting. I pulled the device back, and the image that loaded made the world turn gray. Megan stood in the center of a gilded ballroom, her white silk dress shimmering under the massive crystal chandeliers. And there, draped around her neck, catching every flicker of light, was the one thing that proved they never intended for me to have a place in that family. My grandmother's necklace. The delicate, heirloom gold chain with the signature teardrop diamond pendant. I had seen that necklace in every family portrait since the 1950 seconds, and I had felt its cool weight when my grandmother pressed that velvet box into my hands on my 19th birthday. This is for your wedding day, Sarah, she had whispered with a ghost of a smile. I want it against your heart when you start your own life. My mother had looked me in the eye 2 months ago and told me the necklace was lost in a safety deposit box or too fragile to wear. She had lied. She had committed a blatant act of theft, handing my rightful owner legacy to Megan just to make her shine a little brighter in a room full of strangers. Standing there in the dark garden, the betrayal crystallized into something sharper than grief. This was an inheritance scandal they thought I was too difficult to fight. But as I stared at the photo, a cold resolve began to harden deep in my chest. If my family wanted to play the game of rewriting history, they were about to find out that I kept much better records. The necklace would come back to me. One way or another. By the time Daniel and I finally retreated to our hotel suite, the shimmering joy of the day felt like it had been doused in kerosene and lit with a single, spiteful match. My white dress, once a symbol of a new beginning, trailed behind me like a heap of heavy, exhausted lace. My cheeks were stiff, aching from hours of forced smiles and the effort of keeping my composure while my world was being dismantled from afar. Daniel kicked off his dress shoes and collapsed onto the bed with a weary groan, already tugging at his silk tie. I wanted to collapse beside him, to sink into the safety of his warmth, but the clutch in my hand felt like it was burning. My phone was still vibrating, a persistent, rhythmic thrum against my palm. I slipped into the bathroom, clicked the heavy lock, and leaned against the cold tile. I pressed play on the first voicemail. My mother's voice started out with a brittle, rehearsed sweetness, a lullaby made of glass. "Sarah, honey, what a beautiful day for you. I hope everything is going smoothly." Then, her tone shifted, the sweetness evaporating into something sharp and demanding. "Listen, I gave Megan Grandma's necklace. She needed something truly meaningful to wear tonight, and frankly, it just looks better on her. Don't make this a big deal. It's just jewelry, and you've already got plenty of nice things. Now, Megan's catering is a disaster. The vendor double-booked and we're short on dessert for 200 people. Call that bistro you work with and pull some strings. We really need you on this, darling. Call me back the second you get this." I stared at my reflection in the mirror, bile rising in my throat. Just jewelry. That's what she called it. She called a theft of my history. Just jewelry. I remembered my grandmother's hands, thin, spotted with age, and trembling slightly as she pressed that velvet box into mine. "This is for your wedding, Sarah," she had whispered, her eyes clear and unguarded. "I want this to rest against your heart so you'll know I'm with you." It wasn't about the carats or the gold. It was a thread of love stretched across generations, specifically tied to my name in her estate documents. And my mother had simply severed that thread, lied about its condition, and handed it to my sister without a second thought. I sank onto the edge of the tub, the lace of my gown pooling around me like a funeral shroud. For a moment, the room seemed to tunnel. The hum of the air vent and the distant, muffled music from the hotel lobby felt miles away. My chest squeezed so tight I thought my ribs might snap. This wasn't just about a diamond pendant. It was about every birthday where Megan got the 3-tier cake while I got a grocery store sheet. Every Christmas where her gifts were wrapped in gold while mine were an afterthought. It was about being told don't be sensitive every time I bled and be happy for her every time she took what was mine. I had spent 31 years convincing myself they were just careless. Now, the proof gleamed cold and undeniable. They were deliberate. The betrayal wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern. Clarity slid into my mind like a surgical blade. While Megan was posing for the press with my legacy around her neck, and my mother was sipping vintage champagne while ordering me to fix her chaos, I realized I was done being the family's silent auxiliary. I stood up, wiped the smudged kohl from my eyes, and felt a jagged resolve hardening in my gut. I walked back into the bedroom, opened my laptop, and began. Every voicemail was downloaded. Every frantic text from Jenna was screenshotted. Every photo of Megan wearing the stolen heirloom was archived into a folder I labeled simply, "The Reckoning." This was the start of my going no-contact journey, but I wasn't leaving empty-handed. They wanted me to be a villain in their story. Fine. I was going to be the most organized villain they had ever met. The morning after my wedding, the phone didn't just ring, it screamed. 112 missed calls. 34 voicemails. Not a single one offered a congratulations or an, "I'm sorry we weren't there." Instead, they were frantic orders, weaponized guilt, and shrill demands for me to fix Megan's floral arrangements or apologize for upsetting the family. By breakfast, I didn't just silence the device, I slid it into the back of a velvet-lined drawer and turned the key. It stayed there for 4 months. At first, that silence felt like freefall. I had spent my entire life as a satellite orbiting my family's needs, my worth calculated solely by their approval. Without their voices, the days felt strangely hollow, but Daniel became my anchor. "We're done living in their noise," he told me over coffee one morning. "It's time we made our own." So, I channeled every ounce of my suppressed rage into the Urban Health Collective, the scrappy nonprofit where I'd worked for years. Before, I had kept my head down, playing the supportive role I'd been trained for. Now, I volunteered for the high-stakes budgets no one else wanted to touch. I stayed until the janitors turned off the lights, rewriting grant proposals until the words practically glowed with conviction. When a major pharmaceutical donor threatened to pull their funding, I didn't send my boss, I walked into the boardroom myself. 8 months later, I was promoted to executive director. The title came with a salary bump that felt like pure oxygen and a level of legal ownership over my career I'd never known. I used that momentum to launch the Rising Tide, a mentorship program for women trapped in toxic corporate or family environments. It started with 6 women in a rented library basement. By the end of the year, we had a waiting list of 200 and a feature in the local business journal. Daniel cheered at every milestone, even on the nights we ate lukewarm takeout at midnight, surrounded by spreadsheets. "You're building a fortress, Sarah," he'd say. "And this time, they aren't on the guest list." We bought a house that sprang a colonial with a wraparound porch and floors that creaked with character. Our dining table became the heartbeat of a new orbit. We hosted Sunday roasts and loud, messy birthday parties for the friends who had become our chosen family. It was a life built on transparency, not performance. Jenna remained my only window into the Whitmore household. Her late-night calls were like dispatches from a war zone I had successfully escaped. Megan's third wedding planner just walked out. She whispered once. She wanted a literal swan release in a ballroom with no windows. Another time, "Your father is complaining that you're abandoning your duties. He actually told the neighbors you were too unstable to visit." I just shook my head. The karma was already beginning its slow, inevitable crawl toward their door. Even Chloe, my former best friend who had helped them smear my name, tried to reach out. Every few months, a "thinking of you" text would pop up, breezy and hollow, as if she hadn't stood in a ballroom and helped them rewrite my betrayal into a story of my own making. I never replied. My going no-contact policy wasn't a punishment, it was a boundary. Then, one rainy Tuesday, while searching for an old tax file in our home office, I clicked on a folder I hadn't opened in years. It was labeled Grandma Estate. My breath hitched as I scrolled past old photos until I hit a PDF of her final will. There it was, in her elegant, sharp cursive. "I leave my teardrop diamond necklace to my granddaughter, Sarah June Whitmore, to be worn by her on the day of her marriage." The words were a physical weight. It wasn't just a memory anymore. It was a legal mandate. I realized then that I didn't just have scars. I had the estate documents that could burn their polished lies to the ground. It was a humid Thursday afternoon when Jenna's name flashed in my inbox, the notification sound cutting through the quiet hum of my office like a starting pistol. The subject line was chillingly simple: "The smoking gun." I clicked the attachment, a high-resolution PDF, and as the image rendered on my screen, my stomach did a slow, nauseating somersault. The document was a supplemental inventory list from my grandmother's estate, scanned so clearly I could see the grain of the paper. I had seen the will before, but I had never seen this. It was an addendum, signed 3 weeks after my grandmother passed. My name was there, typed in cold, unyielding font next to the description of the teardrop necklace. But at the very bottom, beneath the signatures of the executors and witnesses, was a handwritten note in my mother's unmistakable, loopy script. It read, "Released to Megan Whitmore for temporary use only, June 15th. To be returned to Sarah Whitmore, the rightful owner, immediately following the engagement gala." I read it 3 times, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Temporary use. To be returned. My mother hadn't just accidentally misplaced my inheritance. She had signed a legal acknowledgement that she was taking something that didn't belong to her. She had documented her own theft. For 2 years, she had looked me in the eye and told me the necklace was damaged or lost, all while holding a paper that proved she was a liar. This was no longer just a family betrayal. It was a documented inheritance scandal. I leaned back in my leather chair, the faint scent of Daniel's morning coffee still lingering in the room, but my mind was miles away. For so long, they had relied on my silence and my desire to be the bigger person. They were confident that the truth was slippery and easily buried under their social status. But this document was a net, and they were finally tangled in it. I typed a short reply to Jenna. "You've given me exactly what I needed. Keep this between us." The following Monday, I didn't call a family therapist or a mediator. I called Arthur Sterling. Arthur was a man who didn't believe in loud displays of power. He believed in the surgical application of the law. His office was a fortress of dark mahogany and floor-to-ceiling glass that looked out over the city's legal district. It smelled like expensive stationery and old, settled justice. He listened to my story for 40 minutes without saying a word, his silver fountain pen dancing across a legal pad. When I finally slid the estate documents across the desk, his eyes sharpened. He studied the signature, then the date, and finally the temporary use clause. A slow, cold smile spread across his face, the kind of smile a shark might give before a meal. "This," he said, tapping the paper with a manicured fingernail, "is what we call an open and shut case of wrongful withholding. You have absolute legal ownership. If we file a suit, you won't just win. You'll dismantle them." He leaned back, his eyes searching mine with a clinical precision. "But I have to ask, Sarah, do you want to resolve this quietly in a boardroom, Or do you want them to feel the full weight of their actions in the eyes of the world? I thought of Meghan posing in that ballroom. I thought of my father laughing about the black sheep while standing next to my stolen legacy. I thought of the rows of empty chairs at my wedding. The ache in my chest finally went cold, replaced by a crystalline certainty. I want public humiliation, I said, my voice not wavering for a single second. I want them to see the truth exactly when they think they're at their highest. Arthur nodded once. A sharp, professional acknowledgement. Then we plan for Meghan's wedding. And we make sure karma arrives exactly on time. After my promotion, the world didn't shift overnight, but I did. For 3 years, I had let my family define me as the difficult, invisible child, a ghost at my own table. Now, I carried something they couldn't touch: leverage. I wasn't just relying on estate documents or the will. I had the icy, calm certainty that I no longer had to follow their script. I built my influence quietly, like a fortress being raised in the fog. I doubled down on my projects, landing a federal grant that put my face in every major local newspaper. My name started appearing on board lists and charity committees. I never turned down an invitation. I traded business cards and remembered the names of grandchildren. I learned that true power isn't a scream, it's the quiet nod of recognition across a room. I purposefully drifted near my family's social orbit. My parents lived for their image in these circles, and I didn't hide from them anymore. Instead, I occupied the same spaces with a polite, distant smile, never mentioning Meghan, never acknowledging the inheritance scandal that was brewing in the dark. I simply let my successful presence contradict every lie they'd ever told. For me, going no contact didn't mean hiding. It meant becoming untouchable. My silence the phone policy remained, but my face was everywhere they wanted to be. That's when I met Sloane Masters. Sloane was a lifestyle journalist whose column had the power to make or break a socialite's reputation. She specialized in what she called the rot beneath the velvet, the messy truths hidden under $50,000 parties. We met at a gala for the symphony when I complimented her vintage Art Deco brooch. She had a taste for sharp edges and secrets. I didn't hand her mine immediately. I fed her glimpses. I spoke about the burden of being the shadow to a golden child and a family obsessed with their own reflection. Sloane leaned in, intrigued, the scent of a story in the air. "You're good," she whispered, her eyes narrowing over her champagne flute. "Most people spill their guts for a headline. You let the air hang." We met for lunch regularly after that. Sloane was always jotting notes, and I was always careful. I never mentioned the necklace by name, but I didn't have to. She was a bloodhound for a scent trail. Meanwhile, Meghan's wedding was morphing from a rumor into a citywide spectacle. At a networking luncheon, I overheard the gossip at the next table. "Sterling Heights is booked solid for 2 years. One woman laughed, and yet Meghan Whitmore secured it in 8 months. The family wants it to be a press event." Another woman chimed in about the 14-page binder of floral demands alone. I froze, my fork suspended in midair. Sterling Heights wasn't just a venue. It was a fortress of marble and imported Italian fountains. It was a stage for society darlings and CEOs. And Meghan had chosen it for her crowning moment. My mind raced. This wasn't just a wedding. It was going to be a media circus. It was the perfect, most visible stage on earth to reveal the theft and finally reclaim my status as the rightful owner. I held the one thing that could turn her perfect day into a nightmare. That night, I showed Daniel the final strategy. I explained how the betrayal would be undone. "They stole my past," I told him, "so I'm going to make sure the world sees their future for exactly what it is." He looked at me with a quiet, fierce intensity. "So what are you going to do?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. I just looked at the folder on my desk. The plan was no longer a dream. It was a surgical reality designed for public humiliation. I was finally ready to prove my legal ownership, and I was going to use their own karma as the fuel. The morning of Meghan's wedding arrived with a golden, mocking clarity. It was the kind of lighting that photographers usually charge double for a soft, ethereal glow that Sloane Masters had already captured in a cryptic social media post featuring the Sterling Heights gates at dawn. I wasn't on the guest list, of course. My family had long since surgically removed me from their official history, but I didn't need a seat in the front row to feel the electricity humming under the surface of the city. My plan had been a clockwork mechanism months in the making, and the gears were finally turning. On my mahogany desk sat the folder that held my primary weapon, The estate documents, the original will, the signed release form with my mother's incriminating handwriting, and high-resolution shots proving Meghan's theft during her engagement gala. On top of the stack sat Arthur Sterling's formal legal demand. The instruction was absolute: return the teardrop heirloom to the rightful owner, Sarah June Whitmore, immediately, or face the full weight of litigation for a high-profile inheritance scandal. I had authorized Arthur to deliver the papers at precisely 3:15 p.m. That was the specific window Jenna told me Meghan would be center stage for her pre-ceremony photos, champagne flowing, professional cameras clicking, the absolute height of her vanity. At 3:12, my phone buzzed on the desk. Entering the perimeter, Arthur texted. At 3:17, a second message arrived. The serve is complete. Silence has fallen. Then, a heavy, expectant pause until Jenna's name lit up the screen. She was practically hyperventilating into the receiver. Sarah, you should have seen the public humiliation. Arthur walked right into the bridal suite with 2 associates. He handed the papers to the lead planner and your mother in front of the entire wedding party and the hair and makeup team. The air just left the room. It was like someone pulled the plug on the universe. What did Meghan do? I asked, my voice a cool, steady stream. She's having a total meltdown, Jenna whispered, her voice shaking with a mix of shock and awe. She actually threw her silk bouquet at the vanity mirror and shattered a bottle of perfume. But then Arthur showed the venue manager the proof of legal ownership and that release form your mother signed. The manager looked terrified. He told your mother that Sterling Heights wouldn't touch the liability. They told her the necklace had to leave the building immediately or the police would be called to escort the stolen property off-site. Meghan is literally tearing the chain off her neck while the photographers are awkwardly packing up their gear. Sarah, your mother looks like she's swallowed a grenade. The mask didn't just slip. It shattered into a million pieces. The betrayal that had defined my life for years was finally being undone by the weight of their own karma. My chest felt light, almost buoyant, as if I were finally breathing oxygen instead of smoke. This wasn't a shouting match or a desperate plea for love. It was a surgical, legal removal of their power. By early evening, the first ripples of the inheritance scandal were hitting social media. Guests were already posting vibe checks about the missing heirloom and the unexplained delay in the ceremony. Sloane Masters posted a single, lethal line to her blog. Some brides wear white. This one wore a crime. I sat on my back patio with Daniel, watching the sun dip into the river, knowing that miles away, Meghan's perfect stage was collapsing into a heap of expensive, hollow ruins. The story they had spent decades spinning was finally being rewritten by the cold, hard truth. The morning after Meghan's disaster at Sterling Heights, the whispers didn't just circulate, they grew teeth. I woke up not to the sound of birds but to my phone jittering against the nightstand, its screen a neon blur of notifications. The digital world was already thick with the debris of the night before. Grainy, unfiltered videos of Meghan practically running through the marble hallways of the estate. Her neck glaringly bare, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow. The captions were a masterclass in modern public humiliation, ranging from "Where's the Diamond" to "Bride's Heirloom Mystery." But it was Sloane Masters' feature article that truly drove the stake through their reputation. The headline read, "The Stolen Sparkle, a tale of 2 sisters and 1 missing diamond." It was a surgical piece of journalism. She didn't need to name me as the victim. The estate documents she quoted did all the heavy lifting. She laid out the timeline of the theft with chilling accuracy, from my grandmother's original will to the temporary use form my mother had so arrogantly signed. The final sentence was a cold, clean cut. The heirloom has finally been returned to its rightful owner, the granddaughter who was promised it in writing. By lunch, the local news cycles had caught the scent. Headlines like "Society Wedding Rocked by Inheritance Scandal" and "Whitmore Heirloom Stripped from Bride Mid-Ceremony" flickered across my laptop screen. I sat at my kitchen island, a mug of black coffee cooling in my hands, while Daniel stood at the stove, the comforting sizzle of frying eggs a sharp contrast to the digital storm outside. My hands were steady now, the tremors of the past 3 years finally replaced by a heavy, satisfying weight of release. My phone was a hive of activity, 74 missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize, and twice that many from the family members who had previously silenced the phone on me. I didn't answer a single one. Jenna called around noon, her voice buzzing with a mix of disbelief and dark triumph. "Sarah, it's a total wreckage. Your mother is pacing the house like a trapped animal, and your father is threatening to sue everyone from the florist to the newspapers. but even he knows the law is a wall he can't climb. Megan hasn't left her bed. Her new in-laws are talking about an annulment. They didn't sign up for a front-page scandal. I could see them so clearly in my mind, the polished facade of the Whitmore family finally crumbling under the floodlights they had so desperately sought. They had made me invisible for decades, but now, they were being seen for exactly what they were. Jenna mentioned Chloe, too. She's gone completely silent. People are calling her out for lying about the maid of honor situation. Her social standing just evaporated. I didn't feel joy at Chloe's downfall, just a cold, distant confirmation of karma. She had chosen a side, and the side was wrong. That evening, Daniel and I ate a quiet dinner on the porch as the sun turned the river into a ribbon of molten gold. My phone continued to buzz on the table between us, Mom, Dad, Megan, until I finally flipped it over, letting their voices disappear into the dark. The final voicemail from my father was a masterpiece of narcissistic projection. Sarah, this is childish. You've humiliated your family and ruined your sister's life over a piece of jewelry. Do the right thing and call your mother. I deleted it before he could finish. He still thought he was the one who could define what the right thing was. He was wrong. The legal ownership was mine. But the silence, that was my true victory. The weeks that followed the storm felt like living in the hollowed-out aftermath of a massive hurricane. The winds of the inheritance scandal had finally died down, and the thunder of the public humiliation had faded into a distant rumble. For the first time in my 31 years, there was a stillness in my life that wasn't empty, it was solid. The Whitmores had no stories left to spin. The evidence was too crystalline, the betrayal too public, and their carefully polished image had collapsed like a house of cards in a gale. I didn't need Jenna to tell me that the society pages had stopped calling my parents, or that Megan's face had been scrubbed from every local boutique's Instagram. I saw the karma in the way people in town now crossed the street to avoid the awkwardness of their company. And through it all, my silence remained my greatest shield. I didn't post a single cryptic quote. I didn't call to gloat. My life was a wall they couldn't scale, a door they could no longer pound on. By the third year, the frantic calls from my father stopped entirely. The silence they had once used to punish me had become the sanctuary I used to protect myself. On the third anniversary of my wedding, Daniel and I returned to that quiet little French bistro by the river. The table was set with flickering candles, the soft light making the world feel like a scene from an old film. Halfway through the meal, Daniel reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the velvet box. My breath hitched. He opened it, and the teardrop diamond caught the candlelight, glowing like a captured star. The necklace. My grandmother's promise. It's time, Sarah, he said softly. I turned my back to him, brushing my hair aside, and felt the cool, heavy metal settle against my skin. It warmed almost instantly, as if it had been waiting decades for this exact moment of contact. When I turned back, Daniel was smiling, that steady, anchoring smile that had seen me through the dark. It looks like it's finally home, he whispered. I reached up, my fingers brushing the pendant, and I realized it was never just about the gold. My grandmother had seen me when everyone else looked through me. She knew I wasn't just a shadow or a backup plan. When she gave me this, she was giving me a vow. I see you. You matter. That faith had carried me through the empty chairs of my wedding and the fury of the theft. Now, as I walked out into the cool night air, the diamonds flashing under the street lamps, I understood. My family thought they had banished me to the dark, but they had actually given me the keys to my own freedom. I looked at my reflection in a darkened shop window, shoulders back, eyes clear, a woman who had stopped waiting for permission to exist. I was my grandmother's granddaughter, stubborn, strong, and finally undeniably visible. I whispered a vow of my own into the night, a promise that I would never again let anyone else write my story. The door behind me was locked, the key was gone, and for the first time in my life I wasn't looking back.